What happens when one of the greatest logical minds in history begins asking questions not just about mathematics, but about war, power, freedom, and the survival of humanity itself? Bertrand Russell spent nearly a century watching the world transform through world wars, revolutions, and the birth of nuclear weapons. Instead of remaining a quiet academic, he chose to challenge governments, question dangerous ideas, and defend the importance of reason in an age of growing chaos. His life became a remarkable journey through the most turbulent century in modern history. Bertrand Russell was born on May 18, 1872, into one of the most prominent aristocratic families in Britain. His life began within a world of privilege, political influence, and intellectual tradition. His grandfather had twice served as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and the Russell family was deeply connected to the political and social elite of Victorian Britain. Yet the circumstances of his early childhood were far from stable or joyful. Tragedy struck repeatedly during his earliest years, shaping the emotional landscape that would influence the development of one of the most remarkable philosophical minds of the 20th century. His parents died when he was still very young. First, his mother passed away, and soon afterward his father also died, leaving the child and his older brother orphaned. As a result, he was raised by his grandparents at their large estate. The household was governed by strict moral discipline and strong religious expectations. His grandmother, a woman of deep Protestant conviction, believed strongly in duty, restraint, and moral seriousness. Life in this environment was orderly and respectable, but it could also feel emotionally distant. The young boy grew up surrounded by books, ideas, and a strong expectation that intellectual life should be taken seriously. However, he was also an intensely lonely child. Much of his early education took place at home under the guidance of tutors rather than in ordinary schools. Without the companionship of other children, he spent long periods alone reading and reflecting. These solitary years became an important part of his intellectual development. The habit of deep thinking, quiet study, and long reflection would remain with him for the rest of his life. During adolescence, he experienced periods of profound loneliness and doubt. He later wrote openly about moments when he felt a deep sense of isolation and struggled to find meaning in life. Yet, during these same years, he encountered something that would change the direction of his thinking completely: mathematics. Discovering geometry and mathematical reasoning felt like discovering a world of perfect clarity. Unlike the confusing emotional experiences of everyday life, mathematics offered certainty, precision, and logical beauty. For him, mathematics appeared almost like a form of truth untouched by human confusion. Logical arguments moved step by step toward clear conclusions. Problems had solutions that could be demonstrated rather than argued endlessly. This discovery brought enormous intellectual excitement and also a sense of stability. The certainty of mathematical reasoning would later become one of the foundations of his philosophical work. Eventually, he entered Trinity College at the University of Cambridge, one of the most prestigious academic institutions in Britain. Cambridge at the end of the 19th century was a vibrant intellectual environment where debates about science, philosophy, politics, and mathematics flourished. Here he encountered a group of brilliant thinkers who were questioning many traditional assumptions about knowledge and logic. At Cambridge, he studied mathematics and philosophy, quickly gaining a reputation for his exceptional intellectual ability. The atmosphere of the university encouraged open discussion and careful reasoning. Students and professors engaged in debates that explored the foundations of knowledge itself. How do we know that something is true? What is the structure of logical reasoning? Can mathematics be explained entirely through logic? These questions fascinated him deeply. Instead of accepting mathematical truths as mysterious or self-evident, he wanted to understand their logical foundations. If mathematics appeared perfectly certain, what made that certainty possible? Could all mathematical truths be derived from a small number of logical principles? This curiosity led him into a collaboration with another brilliant mathematician and philosopher named Alfred North Whitehead. Together, they embarked on an extraordinarily ambitious intellectual project. Their goal was to demonstrate that the entire structure of mathematics could be built upon the principles of logic. If successful, this work would reveal that mathematics was not simply a collection of formulas and techniques, but part of a deeper logical structure underlying human knowledge. The result of this collaboration became one of the most famous works in the history of mathematical philosophy, a monumental book called Principia Mathematica. The work attempted to show that even basic mathematical ideas could be derived from logical reasoning. Although the project was extremely technical and difficult to read, it represented a revolutionary attempt to understand the foundations of mathematics and logic. At the same time, his philosophical interests were expanding beyond pure mathematics. He began examining how language and logic shape human thought. Many philosophical problems, he believed, arise because language allows confusion and ambiguity. If philosophers could analyze language with greater precision, many traditional debates might be clarified or even dissolved. This approach would later become one of the foundations of modern analytic philosophy, a movement that emphasizes logical clarity and careful analysis of language. Rather than constructing vast speculative systems about the nature of reality, analytic philosophers focused on breaking down complex ideas into precise logical statements. Although his early academic work focused heavily on logic and mathematics, his curiosity about the world was far broader. He was deeply interested in politics, ethics, and the role of intellectuals within society. Living during a period of dramatic global change, he observed the rise of industrial society, scientific advancement, and growing tensions between nations. Gradually, he began asking questions not only about logic, but also about the responsibilities of individuals within modern society. What obligations do citizens have when governments pursue war? Should intellectuals remain neutral observers or speak out against injustice? Can rational thinking help reduce conflict between nations? These questions would soon transform him from a quiet academic philosopher into one of the most outspoken public intellectuals of the 20th century. His commitment to rational thinking, combined with a deep concern for human suffering, would lead him into conflicts with governments, universities, and powerful institutions. The same logical clarity that shaped his philosophical work would also guide his efforts to challenge war, defend freedom of thought, and encourage humanity to confront the dangers created by its own technological power. As his reputation within academic circles continued to grow, his life gradually expanded beyond the quiet world of mathematical logic. The intellectual discipline that had first attracted him to mathematics now began shaping his approach to many broader philosophical questions. Instead of relying on vague speculation, he believed that philosophy should aim for the same clarity and precision found in scientific reasoning. Ideas should be examined carefully, definitions should be precise, and arguments should follow clear logical steps. This belief placed him at the center of a new philosophical movement that would later become known as analytic philosophy. Rather than constructing large speculative systems about the universe, this approach focused on analyzing the structure of language and the logic behind philosophical arguments. Many traditional philosophical debates, he argued, were confused not because the questions were impossible to answer, but because the language used to express them was unclear. By carefully examining how words function in logical statements, philosophers could dissolve many apparent problems. One of his most influential contributions to philosophy during this period involved the analysis of language and reference. He became fascinated by how words refer to objects or ideas in the world. When someone speaks about something, what exactly allows that statement to be meaningful or true? These questions led him to develop a theory known as the theory of descriptions, which attempted to explain how language refers to things even when those things do not actually exist. To illustrate this puzzle, he examined sentences that appear to describe something specific but may not correspond to any real object. Instead of assuming that such sentences must refer to mysterious or imaginary entities, he proposed that the logical structure of the sentence itself could explain how it functions. By breaking statements into smaller logical components, the meaning of complex sentences could be clarified. This method of analysis had enormous influence on later philosophers and became a cornerstone of analytic philosophy. While these technical discussions about logic and language were unfolding within universities, the world outside academia was entering a period of increasing tension. The early 20th century was marked by growing rivalries among European powers. Industrialization had expanded economic competition, nationalism was rising across many nations, and military alliances were becoming increasingly rigid. As these forces intensified, the possibility of a large-scale war began to loom over Europe. When the First World War finally erupted in 1914, the consequences were immediate and devastating. Millions of soldiers were mobilized, and governments across Europe demanded loyalty and patriotic support from their citizens. For many intellectuals, the war created a difficult moral question. Should they support their governments during a national crisis, or should they criticize the violence unfolding across the continent? He chose a path that required unusual courage. Deeply disturbed by the destruction caused by the war, he became one of the most outspoken critics of the conflict in Britain. Rather than accepting the widespread belief that war was necessary for national honor or security, he argued that the violence represented a tragic failure of human reason. Nations, he believed, were allowing pride, fear, and political rivalry to override rational judgment. Publicly opposing the war during this period was not a popular or safe position. Many people believed that criticism of the government during wartime weakened national unity. Yet he continued writing articles, giving lectures, and speaking openly about the dangers of militarism and nationalism. He believed that intellectuals had a responsibility to challenge policies that produced unnecessary suffering. His opposition eventually brought serious consequences. The British government viewed his activism as a threat to public morale. He was dismissed from his teaching position at Cambridge because of his anti-war views, and he faced legal penalties for writings that criticized government policy. At one point, he was even imprisoned for several months due to statements considered damaging to the war effort. Despite these hardships, he remained committed to his principles. The time spent in prison became an unexpected opportunity for reflection and writing. Deprived of his usual academic environment, he used the period to think more deeply about philosophical problems and social questions. The experience reinforced his belief that intellectual independence often requires personal sacrifice. After the war ended, the world faced the difficult task of rebuilding both physically and politically. The conflict had destroyed empires, altered national borders, and left millions of families grieving lost relatives. Many people began questioning the political systems and ideologies that had allowed such devastation to occur. During this period, his public role as a writer and lecturer expanded dramatically. No longer known only as a technical philosopher working on mathematical logic, he began addressing broader audiences interested in social issues, education, and the future of civilization. His writing style became clearer and more accessible, allowing complex philosophical ideas to reach readers outside universities. He wrote essays discussing the importance of freedom of thought, the dangers of dogmatic belief, and the need for rational discussion in political life. In his view, many of humanity's greatest conflicts arose not from unavoidable necessity, but from rigid ideologies that prevented people from reconsidering their assumptions. A society that encouraged open debate and critical thinking, he believed, would be far less likely to repeat the tragedies of war. These ideas gradually transformed him into one of the most recognized public intellectuals of his time. His voice carried authority not only because of his philosophical brilliance, but also because he had demonstrated the courage to defend his beliefs even when doing so brought personal cost. The same commitment to logical clarity that had guided his early academic work now shaped his broader efforts to encourage a more rational and humane world. After the First World War ended, the world entered a period filled with uncertainty and transformation. Old empires had collapsed, new political ideologies were rising, and many people were searching for answers to questions about how societies should be organized in the modern age. During this time, his role as a philosopher expanded far beyond the quiet academic debates that had once occupied most of his attention. He increasingly felt that philosophical thinking should not remain locked inside universities, but should engage directly with the problems shaping human civilization. One of the central themes of his work during these years was the importance of intellectual freedom. Throughout history, he observed societies had often attempted to control thought by enforcing strict religious, political, or cultural doctrines. When individuals were discouraged from questioning authority, knowledge stopped advancing and injustice often flourished. For this reason, he believed that freedom of thought was not simply a luxury for intellectuals, but a fundamental condition for human progress. His writing from this period frequently addressed the dangers of dogmatism. Dogmatism occurs when individuals become so convinced of their beliefs that they refuse to examine evidence or consider alternative viewpoints. According to his analysis, this attitude had been responsible for many of humanity's most destructive conflicts. When governments, religious institutions, or political movements claimed absolute certainty, they often justified persecution against those who disagreed. Instead of defending rigid belief systems, he encouraged a spirit of skepticism combined with open inquiry. Skepticism in this sense did not mean rejecting all knowledge. Rather, it meant recognizing that human understanding is always incomplete and should remain open to revision. Scientific progress had demonstrated the value of this approach. Scientists constantly test their ideas against evidence, revise theories when new discoveries appear, and accept that knowledge evolves over time. He believed the same intellectual humility should guide political and social life. When people acknowledge the limits of their knowledge, they become more tolerant of disagreement and more willing to cooperate with others. Societies that encourage debate and critical thinking, he argued, are far less likely to fall into fanaticism or authoritarian rule. During the 1920s and 1930s, he traveled widely, giving lectures and writing books that explore these ideas for a broad audience. His works on philosophy, science, and social issues became widely read because they explained complex subjects in clear and engaging language. Rather than writing only for specialists, he believed that philosophy should help ordinary people understand the world more clearly. One subject that interested him deeply was education. Reflecting on his own childhood experiences, particularly the isolation and rigid expectations he had faced while growing up, he began thinking about how education might be improved. He believed that traditional schooling often emphasized obedience and memorization at the expense of curiosity and creativity. In his view, education should encourage independent thinking rather than simply training students to accept established authority. Children should learn how to ask questions, evaluate evidence, and form their own conclusions. A society filled with individuals capable of critical thought would be far more resilient against propaganda, manipulation, and ideological extremism. These ideas eventually led him and his second wife to establish an experimental school for a period of time. The goal was to create an educational environment where students could develop intellectual curiosity and emotional independence. Although the project faced practical challenges and did not last indefinitely, it reflected his broader belief that education plays a crucial role in shaping the character of future citizens. As the 1930s progressed, however, global political conditions were becoming increasingly dangerous. Economic crises, rising nationalism, and political instability were creating fertile ground for authoritarian movements in several countries. Fascism was gaining power in parts of Europe, and many democratic institutions appeared fragile. Having already witnessed the devastation of one world war, he watched these developments with growing concern. His writings during this period warned about the dangers posed by aggressive nationalism and authoritarian leadership. When political systems encourage unquestioning loyalty to leaders or ideologies, rational debate disappears and societies become vulnerable to manipulation. citizens may be persuaded to support policies that ultimately lead to violence and destruction. When the Second World War eventually erupted in 1939, the world once again descended into conflict on a massive scale. Unlike his position during the First World War, his views during the second conflict were more complex. While he continued to dislike war deeply, he believed that the expansion of fascist regimes represented a threat that could not simply be ignored. Totalitarian governments that suppressed freedom entirely posed a danger not only to individual nations, but to the future of human liberty itself. The war years reinforced his belief that the survival of civilization required both political freedom and rational cooperation among nations. Modern technology had dramatically increased humanity's capacity for destruction. Scientific progress had produced powerful weapons capable of causing devastation on a scale never before imagined. Without wisdom and restraint, these technological advances could threaten the very survival of human society. These concerns became even more urgent after the war ended and the world entered the age of nuclear weapons. The development of atomic bombs revealed that humanity had acquired the ability to destroy entire cities in moments. For a philosopher who had spent his life advocating rational thought and peaceful cooperation, this new reality presented one of the most serious moral challenges humanity had ever faced. As the decades continued, his voice grew increasingly important in global discussions about peace, science, and political responsibility. He believed that the same intelligence that had allowed humanity to unlock the secrets of nature must now be used to prevent self-destruction. The survival of civilization, he argued, depended not only on technological progress, but also on the development of wisdom, compassion, and international cooperation. As the world moved into the second half of the 20th century, his attention increasingly turned toward one of the most dangerous developments in human history. The creation of nuclear weapons had fundamentally changed the nature of war. For centuries, wars have been destructive but limited by the technology available at the time. Armies could conquer territory and cities could be destroyed, yet the survival of civilization itself was rarely in question. Nuclear weapons, however, introduced a completely new possibility. For the first time, humanity possessed the ability to destroy itself. The atomic bombings at the end of the Second World War revealed the terrifying power of this new technology. Entire cities could be devastated within moments. As nations began developing even more powerful nuclear arsenals, the risk of global catastrophe became impossible to ignore. For him, this was not simply a political issue, but a profound moral and philosophical challenge. Scientific knowledge had advanced faster than humanity's ability to manage its consequences. He believed that the same rational thinking that had allowed scientists to unlock the laws of nature must now guide political decisions about how such power would be controlled. Without international cooperation and restraint, the rivalry between nations could lead to a disaster that no one would survive. These concerns led him to become one of the most visible voices advocating for nuclear disarmament and global peace. In the 1950s, he joined other scientists and intellectuals who were deeply worried about the growing arms race between major world powers. One of the most significant moments of this effort came when he collaborated with Albert Einstein on a public statement addressing the dangers posed by nuclear weapons. The document urged world leaders to recognize that future wars fought with nuclear technology could threaten the existence of humanity itself. Rather than continuing endless competition for military superiority, nations were encouraged to pursue peaceful cooperation. This appeal helped inspire the creation of international gatherings where scientists from different countries could meet and discuss ways to reduce global tensions. These meetings became part of a broader movement seeking to promote dialogue and prevent nuclear conflict. For him, the effort represented a continuation of the same principles that had guided his life from the beginning. The belief that reason and open discussion must guide human decisions. Even as he grew older, his willingness to speak publicly about controversial issues never faded. In fact, many of his most visible acts of activism occurred during his later years. He participated in protests against nuclear weapons testing and criticized policies that he believed increased the risk of war. His public statements often attracted intense debate, yet he remained committed to expressing his views openly. During this time, he also continued writing books and essays that explored philosophical questions about knowledge, science, religion, and ethics. His ability to explain complicated ideas in clear language made his works accessible to readers far beyond academic philosophy. He believed strongly that philosophy should help ordinary people understand the world and think more critically about the beliefs they encounter. In recognition of his literary and philosophical contributions, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1950. The award honored not only his scholarly work in logic and philosophy, but also his efforts to defend freedom of thought and encourage humanitarian values. By this point, his influence extended far beyond the academic community. He had become one of the most widely recognized intellectual figures in the world. Throughout his long life, he remained deeply committed to the idea that human progress depends on the willingness to question assumptions and examine beliefs carefully. Blind acceptance of authority, whether religious, political, or cultural, had often led societies into conflict and oppression. The antidote to these dangers, he believed, was a combination of rational thinking, intellectual humility, and compassion for others. He also emphasized the importance of curiosity. Knowledge advances when individuals remain curious about the world and open to new ideas. Dogmatism closes the mind, while curiosity expands it. This simple principle guided his approach to philosophy as well as his engagement with public life. As the years continued, he witnessed enormous changes in the world around him. The 19th century into which he had been born was a time of imperial empires and early industrial development. By the end of his life, humanity had entered the age of space exploration, nuclear technology, and global communication. Few individuals had observed such dramatic transformation within a single lifetime. Bertrand Russell died in 1970 at the age of 97, leaving behind one of the most remarkable intellectual legacies of the modern era. His work shaped the development of analytic philosophy, transforming how philosophers analyze language, logic, and knowledge. At the same time, his public activism demonstrated that philosophical thinking could engage directly with the most urgent moral challenges facing society. The influence of his ideas continues to appear in discussions about science, politics, education, and ethics. His defense of free thought remains especially significant in a world where ideological conflicts and political pressures still attempt to control what people believe or say. By insisting that beliefs should always be examined through reason and evidence, he helped create a model of intellectual integrity that continues inspiring philosophers, scientists, and readers across the world. The life that began in quiet loneliness within an aristocratic household eventually became one of the most influential philosophical journeys of the 20th century. Through logic, skepticism, and a deep concern for humanity's future, he reminded the world that knowledge alone is not enough. Wisdom lies in how that knowledge is used, and the survival of civilization may ultimately depend on whether human beings learn to combine intelligence with compassion.